Right then guys, it's PSL here, and I'm here for my all 10 seasons of career mode video on F1 2017. In this video, I'll be going through my experience with the game's career mode, having done all 10 seasons. So I'll be looking at how the teams developed, if the pecking order changed, and just generally who won the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship each season. Obviously, the main reason I'm doing this is to fully test out the car development system in the game's career mode, and to see which teams make best use of it. I also want to see just how different it is to F1 2016's car development system, as a big part of the game's marketing was the 115 upgrades you can fit to your car, when the previous game only had 25. And finally, I did make an all 10 seasons of career mode video on F1 2016. I'll leave a link to that video in the description, as well as in the top left of the screen in a YouTube card. But just to summarise what happened, simply put, Nico Rosberg won the championship in the first season, Lewis Hamilton won the championship in the second season, I won the Drivers' Championship in the third season, driving for Sauber, because let's not forget, in that game you can buy every upgrade easily within 3 seasons. From then on, every team slowly outdeveloped Sauber, and we moved further and further back towards last place. Whilst that was happening, Nico Rosberg won the remaining 7 championships to win a total of 8 Drivers' Championships that career mode. And let's not forget that once you get to about the 6th season, every team has either finished developing their car or is close to it. So the field simply reverts back to how it started, and that's how it remains for the second half of the career mode. I should point out, much like many people did in the comments of that video, that I experienced an especially boring development cycle, and I can prove that that was the unfortunate case because in a later career mode I did on that game, I got to 4 seasons in and well, that 4th season was very interesting. First off, we had Felipe Nasr in the Sauber qualifying in second. I wasn't even driving for Sauber then, I was driving for Manor, so Felipe Nasr and Sauber on their own merit qualified in second. Kevin Magnussen was winning races, Danny Kvyat was taking podium finishes, Julian Palmer even finished on the podium once, and come the end of that bonkers season, Felipe Massa won the Drivers' Championship for Williams at his home Grand Prix with a race to spare. Valtteri Bottas finished second in the Drivers' Championship and away behind Massa. In the Constructors' Championship, Williams dominated, Toro Rosso finished in 4th, and Mercedes, the once dominant Mercedes-Benz, only scored 19 points all season and only beats the privateer teams of Haas and Sauber. That's it. The reason I'm bringing this up is because there's been a big change to the R&D system from F1 2016 to F1 2017. I'll talk about this later, but in short, because there's more upgrades in this year's game, the sort of complete switch around and season starting with one completely unexpected team on top and ending with another, again completely unexpected and under normal circumstances, a midfield team winning the championship. It can happen in F1 2016, but because there's more upgrades in this year's game, the rate of development has been slowed down, so that means that to get that sort of overspeed in development, which you can see in F1 2016, a team would have to develop comparatively twice as quickly as they did on F1 2016, and that just doesn't happen on F1 2017. So the fact of the matter is that sort of bonkers, ever-changing, ever-developing, completely different from real-life career mode doesn't, and in fact I'm fairly certain can't happen on F1 2017. Anyway, back to F1 2017. So for the purposes of really testing the full capabilities of the game's R&D system, I'm starting with the team that has the slowest car on the field, Sauber. So my aim was to see if I could take the slowest team on the field and turn them once again into championship winners. McLaren aren't too far ahead, but then it stretches all the way up to the pretty much equally matched Ferrari and Mercedes. Also, I should point out that when I started recording for this one video back on the 31st of August, Williams was still the 4th quickest team on version 1.5 of the game. But yes, since then the game has been updated, and now if you look at it, Force India are the clear 4th quickest team, and Williams are where Force India were in 5th. Now obviously I didn't do all of the races and qualifying sessions myself in this career mode save, otherwise there's no way I'd have completed 10 whole seasons, 200 entire races by now. So what I did was I would go into the practice sessions and complete as many of the practice programs as possible to earn as many resource points as I could, so then I can upgrade the car as quickly as possible. Then to save time, and because I didn't need to, I would not take part in qualifying, and when it came to the races, I would simulate them. That's why it's also important I take the most cost effective, or at least almost the most cost effective development route possible. So I bought all of the discounts because it's cheaper to pay for each individual cost reduction upgrade to make all of the subsequent upgrades 50% cheaper and then buy them at that lowered price. I'm not going to read out the exact cost differences because I've done that in another video, but long and short of it, you save a grand total of 20,250 resource points by buying the discounts and then buying the upgrades at half price than you do by buying all the upgrades with no discounts applied. So then let's start going through these 10 seasons, and at the halfway mark of the first season, Mercedes opened up a slight advantage over Ferrari in terms of raw speeds, but it was nowhere near enough to stop Ferrari besting the Silver Arrows. In fact, Sebastian Vettel won the Drivers' Championship in Japan, so that means he won the 2017 Formula 1 Drivers' Championship with 4 entire races to spare. But I can't mention the first season without talking about the Brazilian Grand Prix, the race in which everyone except Lewis Hamilton, Romain Grosjean and myself had grid penalties. So everyone below the top 3 positions was just scattered across the grid. Verline started 4th, Van Dorn 5th, Vettel in 6th. There's no rhyme or reason to it, and even if there is, because it doesn't tell you who got how many grid place penalties for what reason, it just appears to be randomly arranged, and honestly, I think it was. It also provides me with one of oh so many examples I have that show that once you simulate a race, qualifying positions go out of the window, and hence why I didn't bother with it. For example, Kimi Räikkönen qualified in 17th and still finished in 2nd. Need I say any more? At the end of the first season, Sebastian Vettel scored a total of 476 points. That means he was only 24 points off the potential maximum he could have scored. Okay, him beating Räikkönen is a given, but Mercedes started with the quickest car and had the quickest car throughout most of the season. So how Vettel beat Räikkönen by a whopping 132 points is beyond me. But the fact that Sebastian Vettel beat Lewis Hamilton by 148 points and Valtteri Bottas in the other Mercedes by 228 points is unbelievable. So it's not entirely accurate to the real life season, and the fact that Pascal Wehrlein, both McLaren drivers, both Toro Rosso drivers, and Jolyon Palmer all didn't score points in this season when they did in real life doesn't help this game's realism. Esteban Ocon strangely only scored 5 points all season, which was significant in contributing to Force India finishing behind Haas in the championship. Speaking of which, Haas did really well for themselves, and since they started and ended the season as the 3rd slowest team, I have no idea how they did that. On the contrary, Toro Rosso really underperformed, as they scored no points all season and finished behind McLaren in the Constructors' Championship on best race finishes, which again, considering Toro Rosso both started and ended the season as the 4th slowest team and 1 place ahead of Haas, I don't have the faintest idea how Haas scored 34 points and finished 5th in the Constructors' Championship, whilst Toro Rosso scored no points despite having the quicker car. Finally, at the other end of the table, Ferrari scored a simply unbelievable 820 points. The maximum they could have scored was 860. So Ferrari, as an entire team, only dropped 40 points all season. In terms of car development, very little happened in Season 1. Force India and Renault closed up a bit to Williams, and of course Ferrari just passed Mercedes, but that kept toing and throwing all season, even though the race results don't entirely reflect that. Meanwhile, all I was able to get done was buy all of the aerodynamic development discounts and chassis department quality control upgrades. Season 2, and right off the bat, Mercedes re-overtook Ferrari to have the quickest car again. This happened in the off-season between Abu Dhabi and Australia. So will Mercedes be able to take back both the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships from Ferrari? At the halfway mark of the season, they still had the slight car performance advantage over Ferrari. So surely this will be their season. No. Sebastian Vettel won the Drivers' Championship at the American Grand Prix. So one race later than last year, but he still took the Drivers' Championship with 3 races still left to go. Abu Dhabi was the race that season with the most amount of drivers taking grid penalties, as only 5 drivers started the Grand Prix without taking any form of grid penalty. So there's been a slight improvement in car reliability / durability and the number of penalties each team is taking compared to the previous season. Come the end of the Grand Prix, Lewis Hamilton finished in second, but still lost out to Sebastian Vettel in the championship by a whopping 125 points, 5 race wins worth of points. Hamilton was only 9 points behind Kimi Raikkonen, but talk about the 1-2 structure at Ferrari. Raikkonen lost out to Vettel by 116 points, and that's less of a gap than last year. In other news, Daniel Kvyat scored Toro Rosso's first point of this entire career mode. Haas lost 2 places in the Constructors' Championship compared to last season, and Force India improved massively to score 69 points this season and finish 5th in the Constructors' Championship. In terms of car performance, Red Bull really closed up on Mercedes and Ferrari, and the middle 3 teams of Williams, Force India and Renault, whilst they didn't catch up to the top 3, pulled away from those teams behind them. As far as Sauber is concerned, we just finished buying all of the discounts for all of the departments, along with the quality control upgrades for the chassis department. So that's 2 seasons just to buy the upgrades, which do nothing except help you get new ones which actually make a difference to your car quicker. So 20% of people's time in a full career mode, assuming they go down the most cost-effective R&D development route, is spent on the foundations. So yes, Sauber have had 2 seasons of standing still, but now that we've got it all set up, it's a matter of catching up and out-developing everyone. But the gap to the other teams is bigger than ever, and it's going to take a while to get to the very top and fight for championships. Halfway into the 3rd season, and Red Bull caught up to Mercedes and Ferrari, so the top 3 were now closer than ever, although at the same time, collectively, even more dominant than ever. Because Red Bull developed so quickly, the gap between the top 3 and 4th place Williams is now alarmingly wide. The top 3 teams may have been closer than ever, but it didn't stop Sebastian Vettel's dominance the slightest. He won the Drivers' Championship at the American Grand Prix, much like the year before, and whilst both Mercedes drivers did take the remaining podium positions, it still didn't mean Mercedes were close in the Constructors' Championship. No, not at all, as while the gap between themselves and Ferrari did close to a comparatively small 148 point deficit, plainly Mercedes was still a way off Ferrari. Force India ended the season with a slower car than Williams and Renault, but still beat both of them, scoring more points than both of them combined. So Force India have coincidentally ended up in the spot that they finished in the Constructors' Championship in real life. The team that really lost out from car development was Haas, who went from being surprisingly good to exactly where they should be as they finished in 7th and only scored 6 points all year. In the Drivers' Championship, Lewis Hamilton beat Kimi Raikkonen to take the runner-up spot, but Hamilton was still 127 points behind Vettel, which is a bigger gap than last year when Hamilton finished in only 3rd place. Finally, and very strangely, only 11 drivers, just over half the field, scored points all year. The drivers who newly lost the ability to score points were Kevin Magnussen and most surprisingly Lance Stroll. Think what you want of Stroll, but he's been driving, at times, the 4th quickest car and still didn't score any points. And Massa scored 63, so it's not like the car's bad, but Lance Stroll just really underperformed in his 3rd season with the team. Last season he scored 61 points, so I don't know what has happened since then, because really, apart from Force India and Renault improving slightly, nothing's changed for him. For Sauber, well, we ended the season still with the slowest car, but we were pretty much level pegging with McLaren. But between the end of Season 3 and the start of Season 4, we fitted 2 minor and 2 major upgrades, meaning we rocketed up from having only the slowest car to having the 2nd slowest car. And in fact, our Sauber is pretty much the same overall pace as Haas's car. Halfway into the 4th season, and all that changed was that Renault had now developed the 4th quickest car, just ahead of Williams and just ahead of Force India. Just a little bit back, Sauber had now outdeveloped Toro Rosso, and we were now not far off at all from that closely contested battle for 4th place. Then we went to the Circuit of the Americas, and surprise surprise, Sebastian Vettel won his 4th straight championship, and his 3rd straight one at that circuit. Come the end of the season, the picture looks remarkably similar to the end of the season before it. Okay, Lewis Hamilton now only lost the championship by 107 points, the closest anyone has been to Sebastian Vettel in this career mode so far. Also, it's plain to see who the best drivers are at Force India, Renault, Williams and now Sauber, as we occupied 7th, 8th, 9th and 10th respectively in the Drivers' Championship. Only 12 drivers scored points all season, the new driver being me, and the only other change is that Renault beat Williams to take 5th in the Constructors' Championship this season. Okay, so we've had 4 fairly repetitive seasons, but it looks like we could finally see some change. The 4th season ended with Sauber having just about the 4th quickest car, and the 5th season started with us having what is definitively the 4th quickest car, thanks to the addition of 2 ultimate upgrades. Meanwhile, Red Bull now have the quickest car. Okay, this isn't new, but as they've started the season with the quickest car, surely they can at least challenge Ferrari and Vettel's tight grasp at the top of both championships. Well, you would hope so, but by the halfway mark, Ferrari had caught up and outdeveloped Red Bull again. Lower down, Mercedes had really dropped off in terms of development. And let's not forget they started the career mode with the quickest car. Now they've got what is distinctly only the 3rd quickest car. And us at Sauber, we're filling the chasmic void between the mid-table Renault and the Goliath top 3. Then finally, 94 races into this 200 race career mode, I won a Grand Prix. Yes, the plucky privateer Ferrari customer team of Sauber won the Singapore Grand Prix. That's the team's first win since the 2008 Canadian Grand Prix, and in typical Singapore Grand Prix fashion, it was completely cheated. This was only because of the wet tyres on a dry track glitch, which I've already explained in another video. Again, the link to it will be in the description. The exciting moments didn't stop there, because the first time I undertook the American Grand Prix in Season 5, Sebastian Vettel won the Drivers' Championship. Although he didn't seem too happy about it, and instead he failed to get his car to do any donuts and instead just ploughed his car at a fairly high speed into the barrier for the world to witness. But when I tried to do this again so I could record it at 60 frames per second and not just 30, he not only didn't do it, but he also didn't even win the championship. So instead he ended up winning the Drivers' Championship at the very next race in Mexico, which at least is a change of scenery for Vettel's 5th championship win in this career mode. On top of that, at that very Grand Prix, I took my first genuinely earned and deserved podium finish, as I was lucky enough to join the podium with Lewis Hamilton, who finished 2nd, and Sebastian Vettel, who unsurprisingly won the race. Come the season's end, Sebastian Vettel finished the championship with his lowest points lead yet, as he was only 95 points ahead of Kimi Raikkonen, who this season did beat Lewis Hamilton to that runners-up spot. So Vettel's championship leads are slowly coming down every season, but at that rate he'll still easily win all 10 drivers' championships. I'm living proof that Sauber were indeed catching up, as I finished 7th in the championship and just behind both of Red Bull's drivers. Lower down the field, Pascal Wehrlein, Fernando Alonso and Jolyon Palmer all scored their first points in this career mode. Fernando Alonso massively outperformed the car, and I don't have the faintest idea how he managed to score 2 points driving that McLaren. McLaren ended the season with the slowest car, and they had the slowest car throughout the entire season. Two things are strange. One is that Williams have really dropped off the pace in terms of development. I'm not sure if this is related or a pure coincidence, but whilst I was progressing through the season, Codemasters released the Sports update, which swapped around Force India and Williams' career mode pace. So maybe that update, whilst it did make the game more realistic, screwed over Williams here. I don't know how it could have, but it is a bit of a coincidence that the second that update gets released, Williams dropped off the pace in this career mode save. The second strange thing is that Red Bull, despite having a car that is plainly quicker than Mercedes and at times was the quickest car in the field, still finished almost 100 points behind Mercedes in the championship. Finally for this season, let me just quickly mention that Ferrari for the 5th time now in this career mode won the Constructors' Championship, and they did it by 363 points, and they only dropped 25 points all season. This was Ferrari's most successful season ever. Come the end of the season, Sauber had just about overtaken Red Bull in terms of car development, and now with us just about to head into season 6, we had the second quickest car and were the team who had the best chance to beat Ferrari in both championships. At the very start of the 6th season, our chances of doing that grew thanks to one ultimate and one major upgrade. So Sauber started the season with the quickest car in the field. Also it's worth noting that McLaren were back up to having the second slowest car, as they had now outdeveloped the once remarkable Haas team. I finished the first race of the season in 3rd. Then at the second round, the Chinese Grand Prix, I took my first 2nd place finish. And then at the 3rd round of the season, the Bahrain Grand Prix, you've guessed it, I won the Bahrain Grand Prix, beating both Ferrari drivers who joined me on the podium, as I took my first genuine and proper race win in this career mode. Come the halfway mark of the season, McLaren had the slowest car in the field once again, Williams slipped down and were now even further away from Force India and Renault, and Sauber had now pulled away from Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, everyone in terms of car development. By this point I had 5 straight race wins, and looking at how much better the Sauber car was compared to all of the others and at the rapid rate at which we were improving, that was a given. The Belgian Grand Prix is an interesting one to talk about. Firstly, because only 3 drivers had grid penalties, so every team's parts durability has improved substantially from season 1, as this race, of all of the ones I recorded from this season, is the one that had the most grid penalties. But that's qualifying, and in the race, well, I won it. Raikkonen came 2nd, Hamilton 3rd. My teammate Pascal Wehrlein, fair play to him, finished in 4th, and he beat Sebastian Vettel, who has dominated the past 5 seasons, as Vettel finished down in 5th place. What we have seen before is a Drivers' Championship being won in the United States of America, but we haven't seen myself in the Sauber win the Drivers' Championship until now. That's right, I won the Drivers' Championship in this ultra-modified Sauber in Season 6 of this career mode. In addition to that, joining myself on the podium was Pascal Wehrlein. Yes, Sauber took a 1-2 finish at this American Grand Prix. So suddenly this career mode has shifted from Ferrari dominance to Sauber dominance. The season ended with very little else to shout about. I won the final Grand Prix of the season just ahead of the 2 Ferrari drivers, and I ended up winning the Drivers' Championship by 101 points. Apart from that, other noteworthy results are that Lewis Hamilton beat my teammate Pascal Wehrlein by only 1 solitary point. Also, Valtteri Bottas underperformed, although I guess considering the Mercedes car is worse than the Red Bull, I guess he did overperform. Well, whatever. Bottas was beaten by Daniel Ricciardo in the championship, but he did beat Max Verstappen. And finally, only 11 drivers scored points again, as Romain Grosjean and Felipe Massa became the new drivers who were unable to score points. For the first time this career mode, it was close between the top 2 teams, as Sauber only lost out to Ferrari by 36 points. So all Pascal Wehrlein has to do is just improve a little bit more, and Sauber could well win the Constructors' Championship next season. There's now a clear and distinct gap between the top 6 teams and the bottom 4, as Renault finished the season with 68 points. But McLaren, Toro Rosso, Haas, and genuinely surprisingly Williams all failed to score points this season. Williams have really let themselves down, as they just seem to have stopped developing their car. Once upon a time they were definitively the 4th quickest team. Now they're 7th and not too far ahead of all of the teams behind them. Ferrari have pulled away from Red Bull and Mercedes in an attempt to catch us up, but it's inevitable they will eventually do it, as at the end of the 6th season we bought the final 2 upgrades, both of which are ultimate upgrades, so we're set to get one final big boost in performance before our truly unbeatable car gets slowly worse compared to the competition, as we are unable to develop it further. I guess this is the best time for me to tell you how the car development went for me. Well, obviously it took me 6 whole seasons to buy every upgrade, which is twice as long as it took me to buy every upgrade on F1 2016. So that's good, but now we've still got little to do for the next 4 seasons apart from wait until everyone else catches us up. So it's the same situation as we were in on F1 2016, but just offset by 3 seasons. Now I was planning to have a debate about whether the quality control upgrades are worth buying in this game, but the good old Reddit community has already worked this out. So, the most cost-effective way of developing your car is to buy the cost reduction upgrades, but just 2 of the quality control upgrades. I didn't know about this until a commenter on my career mode review video told me about it, hence why I, albeit accidentally, started my comparison of having 0 quality control upgrades in my power and aerodynamic departments, but all 5 in my chassis department. I kept track of it, and I had a roughly 50% part fail rate in both my power and aerodynamic departments, but not a single upgrade failure in my chassis department. Doing some rough calculations, assuming a 50% part failure rate, I can confirm it is much cheaper to buy none of the quality control upgrades than it is to buy all 5. Anyway, back to the career mode proper. Season 7 and the first race of the season, Wehrlein qualified 4th, so he's definitely upped his game from last season. Come the end of the Grand Prix, I won, so Sauber, or at the very least my Sauber, is firmly back at the top, and Wehrlein, all credit to him, he qualified 4th and finished 4th, so he did alright there. Later, I achieved a third of the requirements needed for the Triple Crown, as I won the Monaco Grand Prix. That's a first for me and a first ever for the Sauber F1 team. Not only that, but Pascal Wehrlein finished 2nd, so that's a 1-2 for Sauber at Monaco. At the halfway mark of the season, Red Bull once again overtook Ferrari to have the 2nd quickest car, and that's pretty much it. Now you'll notice that my streak of race wins was broken by a DNF in Azerbaijan. That's only because at this point I wasn't driving the car at all. There were no performance upgrades left for me to get, so I didn't bother with practice as there was very little reason to. As a result of that, I forgot to check up on the engine's wear and whether any of the parts needed replacing. If the engine is excessively worn, you can't simulate a race, but only retire, and as I wasn't willing to run the whole race myself, I had no other option than to retire. But luckily, Pascal Wehrlein won the Grand Prix in my absence, so whilst my string of race wins ended, Sauber's consecutive race win tally carries on increasing. Much like way back in the first season of this career mode, the Drivers' Championship was won in Japan, and it was won this time by myself. So I won this Drivers' Championship with 4 races left to go. So that proves beyond doubt how dominant I was this season, and as Pascal Wehrlein took second to help secure another 1-2 finish for the team, it's fair to say that Sauber have been undoubtedly phenomenal this season. The final round of the season, I beat Kimi Räikkönen, who finished in second by a substantial 38 seconds. Behind myself were both Ferrari drivers, then both Red Bull drivers, then Pascal Wehrlein, and then both Mercedes drivers, who finished only in 7th and 8th. Yes, Lewis Hamilton, the real-life 2017 Drivers' Champion, only finished 8th in this Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. And that result was crucial as it meant that Valtteri Bottas beat Lewis Hamilton in the Drivers' Championship by just a single point. I won the Drivers' Championship by 151 points. That's the biggest margin between first and second in the championship in this career mode, and it's close to the biggest winning margin ever in Formula 1. But still, the fact that both Sauber drivers took first and second in the Drivers' Championship shows just how well as a team we have done. Following them is both Ferrari drivers, both Red Bull drivers, both Mercedes drivers, and then Nico Hülkenberg. In the Constructors' Championship, Sauber beat the team that they are still customer to, and technically we still use their year-old engine, Ferrari, by a gigantic 225 points. Haas scored some points courtesy of Grosjean, and the only other change from last season was that Red Bull beat Mercedes by only 36 points. Season 8 didn't start off too strong for Sauber, although it started off worse for Carlos Sainz, as he had a grid penalty at the very first Grand Prix. Again, how on earth did he manage that? Anyway, I did still win the Grand Prix, carrying on my string of race wins, but Pascal Wehrlein worryingly finished all the way down in 9th. Also, Hülkenberg beat Verstappen and Bottas at that Grand Prix, which is pretty impressive. The Malaysian Grand Prix was where I won my 3rd Drivers' World Championship in this career mode. That's the earliest anyone has ever won a Drivers' Championship in this career mode, as I took the title with 5 whole Grand Prix left to run. Also, the podium was an interesting one that race, as Max Verstappen finished in 2nd and Pascal Wehrlein finished in 3rd, which makes that the youngest collective podium ever in Formula 1 by far. That is ignoring the fact that we're 8 seasons in by this point, so Verstappen would actually be 28 years old, Wehrlein would be 31, I would be 27 years old, so ignoring the aging, that's the youngest podium ever in Formula 1.
Wow! You legend! You have done what everyone else thought was impossible. You've won every race this season. This will go down in history as the greatest Formula 1 season ever.
That's right, I completely and utterly dominated this season by winning every single race. That's so dominant a performance, it's never been achieved in Formula 1 before. And in fact, there's never been a season in Formula 1 where a single team has won every single race. That should put into context just how well I and Sauber did this season. In the Drivers' Championship, Sebastian Vettel beat Pascal Wehrlein, unlike last season. Max Verstappen beat Lewis Hamilton in the championship, but Hamilton did beat Ricciardo. Bottas had a really poor season, only scoring 94 points. And actually, we had 14 different drivers scoring points this season, as Grosjean, Massa and Palmer were all able to score a couple of points. There's little to talk about in the Constructors' Championship. Toro Rosso finished last after, strangely, another pointless season, and Force India scored less points than they have done in the past, and less than I would have expected, but still finished 5th in the Constructors' Championship. Red Bull still lost out to Ferrari by quite a big margin, and that's despite the fact that Red Bull both started and ended the season with the second quickest car, and quicker than Ferraris. In fact, they had the quicker car all season, but Verstappen and Ricciardo just weren't able to make use of it. The start of the 9th season and Ferrari ended up fitting enough upgrades to overtake Red Bull, but every single team is still a fair way behind Sauber. We haven't been able to fit any upgrades since the very start of season 7. That's 2 whole seasons and we still comfortably have the quickest car, which shows just how much of a gap we had, and also shows that the rate of development has been halved at least for the AI teams, as in F1 2016, Sauber, we were at the top for not all that long at all, hence why I only won 1 championship in that game, but here I'm already on 2. Halfway into season 9, well, just after actually, as I got some worrying, although inevitable news. Ferrari have fitted a lot more upgrades, and at the Belgian Grand Prix, their car is almost on a par with ours. That was at the Belgian Grand Prix, and at the Malaysian Grand Prix, the race in which I won the championship at, Ferrari had officially developed a quicker car than Sauber's. Anyway, I still won the Grand Prix, so it's not that bad of a day. But the very next Grand Prix, the Japanese Grand Prix, I won another World Championship. That's my 4th consecutive Drivers' Championship in this career mode. But it was also the end of my race winning streak, as Sebastian Vettel won the Japanese Grand Prix, beating me by 7 seconds. And unsurprisingly, especially as now Ferrari have the quickest car in Formula 1 again, Kimi Raikkonen rounded out the podium finishers. But let me emphasise just how long my and Sauber's run of dominance at the top of the sport was. Sauber won every single Grand Prix from the Monaco Grand Prix in season 6 to the Malaysian Grand Prix in season 9. That's 69 consecutive race wins. That's way beyond any sort of dominance seen in F1 previously. The most consecutive race wins for a team in real life F1 is 11. And yes, even for Mercedes, it's only 10 race wins. Although in this career mode, I'm not sure if Mercedes have even ever won a race. Even the most amount of consecutive podium finishes for a team doesn't come close to Sauber's straight race wins. Ferrari amassed 53 straight podium finishes between 1999 and 2002. Impressive, but Sauber got 69 straight race wins. The final round of the 9th season ended with Sebastian Vettel winning, although Kimi Raikkonen and myself weren't too far off, as we were within 5 seconds of him come the checkered flag. Lower down, Valtteri Bottas finished 4th that race, and Nico Hülkenberg in the Renault finished an impressive 5th, beating Lewis Hamilton and both Red Bulls. Finally, Daniel Kvyat in the Toro Rosso scored a point that Grand Prix, so congratulations to him, because let's not forget Toro Rosso in the past few seasons, for whatever reason, have just been almost unable to score points. The Drivers' Championship isn't too exciting. I still beat Sebastian Vettel by 99 points, and he won most of the races ever since he had the quickest car under him again. Lewis Hamilton beat both Red Bull drivers to finish 4th in the championship, but was still 90 points behind Kimi Raikkonen in the Ferrari. Finally, 14 drivers scored points, as whilst both Williams drivers failed to score points, Kvyat scored 2 and Carlos Sainz scored 13 points. That's amazing considering how few points Toro Rosso have scored over the past 9 entire seasons. In the Constructors' Championship, Sauber lost out by only 49 points. That's a shame as we won the past 2 Constructors' Championships, but much like in Season 6, we could have won this one as I did all I really could, but Wehrlein just massively underscored considering the car we had this season. Mercedes beat Red Bull by 45 points, and Renault have really taken a hold of 5th place in the Constructors' Championship, as they scored 100 points. All of them, and I seriously mean all 100 of them, were scored by Nico Hülkenberg. So then, here we are, the start of the 10th and final season, and it looks like it could actually be an interesting one. whilst the past 9 seasons have either been Ferrari or Sauber dominance, this might not be. Red Bull have the quickest car, at the start of the season at least. Mercedes have closed up to Ferrari, and Renault are now right up there with the top 3. Sauber are now the final top half team. Yes, thanks to Renault's burst of development, there's now quite a big gap between the top 5 teams and the bottom 5, now led by Williams. In fact, Force India have dropped back massively, now only having the 8th quickest car, which is why they scored so few points last season, and how Toro Rosso were finally able to get top 10 finishes come the end of last season. The first Grand Prix of the season was held in Australia, and forget about Red Bull and them having the quickest car in the field, because I somehow won the race in the Sauber. In fact, I won the first 4 races of the season, but most interestingly, in Bahrain, I was joined on the podium by Sebastian Vettel and Nico Hülkenberg. That's right, 10 seasons in, and finally, we've got a different team on the podium. But honestly, Hülkenberg really outperformed what is now only the 4th quickest car. Yes, it's close to the top 3, but still. Or maybe it's just that Palmer really underperformed in that Renault, as he didn't score any points that race and he finished in 11th. The race wins didn't quite stop there, as I won the illustrious Monaco Grand Prix one final time. And let's not forget that this Sauber is only the 5th quickest car on the grid, and we can't develop it any further. In fact, we haven't been developing it at all for the past 3 seasons. The Austrian Grand Prix had some interesting results. Kimi Räikkönen won, whilst Hülkenberg finished in 2nd, and I took an astonishing 3rd place, beating Sebastian Vettel. Carlos Sainz took 5th, and he beat both of Mercedes' drivers, and even Jolyon Palmer, whilst still way behind his teammate, still beat both of Red Bull's drivers whilst driving the inferior car. Halfway into the season, Ferrari had outdeveloped Red Bull again. Toro Rosso had passed Williams in car development and now weren't too far behind Sauber. Later on into the season, the Malaysian Grand Prix was another race with some interesting results. Not towards the front, sure, but Jolyon Palmer finished 7th, beating Lewis Hamilton. And let's not forget that Hamilton won the Drivers' Championship in real life this season, and Palmer, even here and now in this career mode, is still in the inferior car, yet still beat Hamilton. And the other Mercedes driver of Valtteri Bottas, well, he's showing just how far the real life Constructors' Champions have fallen during this career mode. Mercedes started off with the quickest car, but they were never really quicker in the races than Ferrari. But at this race in Season 10, Bottas didn't even finish in the top 13. How the once mighty Mercedes have fallen. A rain-soaked Interlagos hosted the Brazilian Grand Prix, in which Sebastian Vettel won his 6th World Championship in this career mode. That means that Sebastian Vettel is now a 10 times World Drivers' Champion. But honestly, more interesting than that is that Nico Hülkenberg won the Brazilian Grand Prix. In recent races, Hülkenberg has made a very strong case for being one of the best drivers in this career mode. Aside from him, Danny Kvyat finished in 5th and Carlos Sainz in 7th, and Lewis Hamilton finished the Brazilian Grand Prix all the way down in 13th. We're talking about the real-life 2017 Drivers' Championship winner who was unable to even score points at this Grand Prix. The final round, the 200th race in this 10-season mega career mode, was won predictably by Sebastian Vettel. Both Mercedes drivers were able to score decent points, as were both Toro Rossos. Romain Grosjean finished in 8th, and Nico Hülkenberg, who won the previous race, suddenly couldn't even score a point in Abu Dhabi. Finally, Pascal Wehrlein ended this career mode pretty much exactly where he started it, as he finished this race down in 18th position. In the Drivers' Championship, Sebastian Vettel won it with 396 points, which is 62 more than me in 2nd and 87 more than Raikkonen in 3rd. Nico Hülkenberg did exceptionally well to take 4th place in the Drivers' Championship in that Renault, especially as he scored 200 more points than his teammate Palmer, who was down in 13th. But there's an even bigger gap between the Sauber drivers, as I scored 331 more points than Wehrlein. Yep, Wehrlein only scored 3 points all season, and we had a pretty decent car throughout most of the season, and we didn't even end up with the slowest car. That's right, McLaren never caught us back up, and we passed them 7 seasons ago. Finally, every driver except both McLaren drivers, Lance Stroll and Kevin Magnussen, scored points during the 10th and final season. Okay, Ferrari won their 8th Constructors' Championship in this career mode, with Sauber having won the other 2, but the effective one-man team of Sauber beat Red Bull and Mercedes. Next, the one-man team of Renault beat the very much two-man and recent improvers Toro Rosso. Force India, Haas, Williams and McLaren all fizzled out. They all saw better days but end the career mode in quite an unremarkable fashion. Yes, even McLaren saw better days, as in Season 5, Alonso scored 2 points for the team, and I still have no idea how he did that, as McLaren only ever had either the worst or second worst car on the grid for 10 whole seasons. In fact, that's very much the issue I have with this game's R&D system. It's so long-winded and slow-moving, and it meant that it took 3 seasons before Sauber saw any sort of improvement due to all the discount buying, and we were by far the biggest and quickest movers. And yes, we could have moved quicker because I bought all the discounts in one go, and as people have already mentioned to me in the comments, I could have, for example, bought all the discounts for the aerodynamics department and then bought all the aerodynamics upgrades. But regardless, you still spend 20% of your time buying the discounts no matter how you divide it up. So that's that, and as I said, Sauber, we were the biggest and quickest movers, and we had 2 seasons of doing nothing. As far as other teams are concerned, Haas did strangely well in the first season and that was it. Williams dropped off at around the midpoint of the career mode and Force India followed suit later on. Mercedes really underperformed, especially in this final season, but they still usually beat Red Bull. In fact, more frustrating than Mercedes not being able to challenge Ferrari's dominance was Red Bull not being able to do the same. Time and time again, Red Bull had the quickest car, but Vettel kept winning. Maybe that's just because of how simulating races works, and it's entirely possible that if you drove the races yourself, you would witness other teams at the top, or at the very least, the same driver wouldn't be winning in such a dominant fashion every single season. If you've got a system where every team has to buy upgrades or else they fall back, why don't we make it a proper exciting, dynamic and random tech race, where in the medium to long term, any team can end up on top? I said it earlier, but because the rate of development has been halved in this year's game due to the extra upgrades, it makes it near impossible for another team to catch up or pass another. The only teams that really did it were Red Bull and Renault were the only team to actually make an impact, and I think that's because Codemasters gave Hülkenberg a clear driver number 1 role in that Renault team, and that gives him a clear performance boost, which is why he was so much better than Palmer. It also explains why Red Bull and Mercedes, whose drivers are much more equal, or at the very least are treated more equally, didn't have a sort of individual driver performance boost to beat Ferrari, as Ferrari, even if they didn't quite have the quickest car, always had a car that was quick enough and a clear driver number 1 of Sebastian Vettel, who, because he was seemingly considered by the game to be the team's driver number 1, that's my theory at least, but because he seemed to be considered to be the team's very much driver number 1, that meant he was so much quicker than Raikkonen and thus everyone else. Strangely, it's a very similar system, assuming I'm correct in saying this, to the system that's in the original Motorsport Manager mobile game. But it's not just Ferrari, because it also explains why I was so quick with a midfield car in the last season, yet Wehrlein scored barely any points. and that's because I was the driver number 1 and he was the clear driver number 2. And it's the same story at Williams as well, as Massa time and time again did much better than Stroll, especially once Williams started to go downhill, because there was one season when Williams were on the start of their decline. Massa was still scoring decent points, but Stroll didn't score any. And I think it's because some teams there's a clear driver number 1, driver number 2, whereas at other teams the drivers are considered by the game to be more equal. So Red Bull, the drivers are equal, Mercedes they're reasonably equal, but Ferrari there's a clear disparity between Vettel and Raikkonen. At Sauber there was a clear disparity between myself and Verline. Same with Williams between Massa and Stroll. Definitely the same with Renault. We saw it at Renault. Hulkenberg was so much better than Palmer, and I think it's because the game considers Hulkenberg, rightly, to be the much better driver than Palmer, and I think it's because of that clear driver number 1, driver number 2 sort of system. It meant that, well, unless you had a much quicker car than Ferrari, you weren't going to beat them, hence why Mercedes and Red Bull never did. And the only team that could ever beat Ferrari was Sauber, and that's only because Sauber, like Ferrari, at times, we had a very quick car, but Ferrari had their driver number 1 of Sebastian Vettel, and Sauber had their driver number 1 of myself. Two driver number 1s can go toe to toe, provided they've got an equal car, as we saw in this career mode. But a driver number 1 and an equal driver, if they're in similarly matched cars, it doesn't work. The driver number 1 always wins. As I said, very similar system to the Motorsport Manager mobile game. I will say again that I'm sure this system isn't quite as prevalent if you do the races yourself, partly because of safety cars, different race strategies, crashes, retirements. They all come into it to spice up a season, which is why the driver 1-2 hierarchy isn't so noticeable, and actually I think if you do the races yourself, I don't think it's as prevalent. Anyway, as I was saying earlier on, why not make the development race fun? Why not speed it up, make the upgrades more effective, or just do something which means we can have bonkers seasons like you can, not always, but can have the pleasure of experiencing on F1 2016. Okay, it's not realistic, but it would make the career mode a lot more fun, unpredictable and dynamic. It would mean that every time you did the career mode you'd end up with something slightly different. I know I did 2 long-term career modes in F1 2016. One was Rosberg dominance, and the other one, as I've already said, we saw Palmer, Kvyat, Magnussen on a podium, Massa won a championship. That was interesting to me, and it kept the career mode fun and engaging, and you just don't get that on this game. But anyway, all that aside, the career mode ended, Sauber said their thank yous to me. I then couldn't look at the laptop again, but I was able to find out my career mode score puts me 1,446 on the PS4, showing just how few people actually complete 10 whole seasons, which to be honest doesn't really surprise me. And my score can't even be that great because I didn't even do any of the qualifying or race sessions, so there's loads of career mode score lost there. It's only that big because I did 200 race weekends, that's the only reason that it's that big. But yes, with that aside, the credits rolled and the 10 seasons of career mode on F1 2017 ends.